Good day. That is called the docking of the hat. The docking of the hat was a custom that gentlemen used when they were introducing themselves or saying hello to lovely ladies. So, lovely ladies, good day to you. Again, as Tammy said, my name is Gary Gillette. I'm the president of the New Bern chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution. The sons and the daughters of the American Revolution are very similar, except, of course, one has males, the other one has females. Now, way back when, in 1889, the SAR started, and at that time, they had men and females in the organization. But the men decided, nah, we don't want the ladies in. So they kicked them out. But a year later, the ladies started their own organization that became the Daughters of the American Revolution. And since then, they are about twice the size of the Sons of the American Revolution. So my wife always reminds me, it's always the males to blame for everything. And I'll accept that. Again, our missions basically is education, patriotism, and history. And that's what we try to get out, and as Tammy said, out in our community and talk to everybody associated with the 18th century. More, not the whole 18th century, but more in line with the time of our American Revolution. First off, I want to talk about my attire, okay, my uniform. If anybody is familiar with George Washington's Continental Army, you'll probably see a little difference in what I have on versus George's Continental Army. Primarily the color. George's Continental Army was blue and red. Mine, of course, is brown and red. The reason being, George didn't get any money to fit up his army until about 1776, when the Continental Congress said, okay, we'll give you some money to put your guys in uniform. Well, my patriot came from Connecticut, okay? And Connecticut decided to join the fight back around the latter part of 1774, early 1775. And the then governor of Connecticut said, hey, George can't give us any money, so I'm going to fit my own army up in the colors, in their own uniform, and if I'm going to pay for it, I'm going to choose my own colors. So he knew what the basic design of George's army was going to look like, so he decided brown and red. And you'll see some of the Connecticut army in brown and white, okay? It depends, okay? We have, in New Bern chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, we have the largest color guard group in the state of North Carolina, okay? The gentleman right there is our color guard commander, Scott Brick. He'll talk about it a little bit later. And in addition to the color guard, we have a musket team that do live fire volleys throughout the state, okay? But the reason I'm bringing it up is because we have, throughout our color guard, we have individuals that they choose to kind of emulate their patriot ancestor. Like me, my patriot ancestor was from Connecticut, so I decided to have the type of uniform that he would have worn. Some of them were mountaineers, some of them were farmers, some of them were just militia. They wore whatever they had on, more civilian type attire. And so our color guard crosses all boundaries, okay? Some of them were Marines during the Revolution. So we have some retired Marines in the group that wear the Colonial Marine uniform. So it's really cool to look at and to see us in uniform, because you won't see just one uniform across the 22 or 23 members that we might have right now. You'll see a combination of everything. So this is my uniform, the red epaulet. Any idea what that stands for? Your rank. And the red at that time was for NCO or sergeant. I have it on one side. Later on, George decided he wanted the epaulets on both sides, but my patriot ancestor, while he was in service, it was during the period of time that they only had it on one. So again, I wore one. This is called a haversack. It is not a man's purse.
Yes, it
Okay?
is.
No, it's not a man's purse. Some of the haversacks were leather, some of them were canvas. There was a variation depending on what the individual needs were at the time. Everybody wore breeches in uniform. That's the three-quarters style pants, and then stockings. The stockings, of course, back then were just made out of linen or cotton. Yep, and they didn't have any elastics, so everybody had to have garters. You know, the men had leather garters or cloth garters, something to keep their stockings up. Things on my shoes. Anybody have any idea what they are?
Spats.
No, not spats.
Spatter dashes, but
Spatter dashes.
Spatter dashes came from spats.
Yeah.
Or excuse me,
No,
spats
spats came from the spatter
spatter
dashes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Later on.
Primarily, they were used by soldiers to keep the thorns and everything off their boots, off their stockings. So they were protections, okay? Some of you may have noticed that some of the spatter dashes are longer, and they're usually worn by the gentlemen that were riding in the cavalry, in the horses, okay? So that's basically the uniform and the tricorn hat, of course, and the feather. It's a turkey feather. You know, a lot of them wore feathers. A lot of them have little, what do you call them on
Cockades.
Cockades on the side. Thank you. She keeps me honest over there, you know. But that's the basic uniform. What I wanted to also show you is something really cool. The pistol. This is a replica of what George Washington had. In fact, he had two of them. It's a pistol. It was made in London, somewhere between 1774 and 1776. In fact, it has on here, London. Two of these were given to George by his best friend and his, what he considered his adopted son. Any idea who that was?
Lafayette.
Lafayette, that's right. Lafayette gave George two of these, okay? They were gifts. George kept them in his saddlebag. They're one shot, and the caliber is .57 caliber. It shoots a pretty mean musket ball. It really does. But George needed two of them because it only shoots one shot, so you better be prepared to have another shot in your saddlebag. George kept these things throughout his military career, the whole time he was president, and until the day he died. After his death, they were given back to the Lafayette estate. They kept them several years, and then they were auctioned off several times. The last time they were auctioned off was about 2004, and the pair went for $2.4 million. The originals. They are now on exhibit in a museum in northern Pennsylvania. I will have these up here after our presentations. If you want to take a look at this, it is a cool. Oh yes, you can pass it around. Feel free. It is a replica. It does not shoot. Okay. Let's see. How am I doing on time?
You're good. You're good.
I'm good? Okay. I'm done. The uniform, the guns, the revolution. One thing I wanted to talk about is some historic event that happened in Newburgh. 1774. Things were just starting to build, okay? We haven't, decided to break away from England yet. That didn't happen until July of 1776. But we were getting tired of all the taxes, all the inabilities to have representation in Parliament, because back then the colonists were not considered British subjects. We were just colonists. We were second class. Okay, you all heard the saying, no taxation without representation. Well, that's how we felt. So in August of 1774, 71 delegates from across the colony of North Carolina came to New Bern. And they had what was called the very first provincial congress. Out of all the 13 colonies, New Bern had the very first provincial congress, that's where things got started. It was kind of like the first protest, okay? Well, out of that first provincial congress, they wrote down 28 resolutions. Those resolutions didn't say, hey, we don't want to be part of the king's country anymore. It just said, hey, we're tired of this stuff. In fact, they said they recognized the king as being their leader. But, there's always a but to it, right? But we're tired of this. We're tired of being taxed. We're tired of not having any representation. We consider ourselves as British subjects, so we want representation in Parliament. Okay, those resolutions became known as the New Bern Resolves. Okay, we celebrate that every year in August. It's usually a 1 or 2 day event. Last year when we had the event, we had over 600 people attend that thing. And it's cool, it really is. We're there to celebrate our history, and that's what it's all about. History needs to be remembered, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get out there to educate our community, educate our children, educate everybody on where we came from and what it took to get to where we are today. It wasn't easy. It really wasn't. And I'm getting out. But, we'll be here. The guns and everything will be up here afterwards, and then we'll have some time for some questions if you have any. On that note, since I'm getting the hook, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Brick.
I'm going to try to talk without the microphone because I do stuff with my hands. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, I'm known to have a loud voice.
Are they broadcasting this? If they are, you need to use the mic so they can hear you.
Well, I'll do the best I can.
Yep.
Okay.
Hold on, plastic.
Well, I'll do it in a second. So, let me first say I appreciate everybody coming out. My love of history and military and things like that came from my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, a Bronze Star recipient, and I used to spend a lot of time with him. So now that I'm a grandfather, I like to try to carry this on. I'm sure in your lives you guys have done a lot of the same things. So I was at the beach yesterday getting shells with my daughters, and I can remember with my grandmother being out there getting shells in Jekyll Island. We're from Ohio, but I was with the Jekyll Island, and I can remember I still have some shells from when I found it with my grandmother a long, long time ago. So my name is Scott Brick. My patriot ancestor's name is John Dieter. It's Americanized. His name was Johannes Dietrich. He's from Pennsylvania, and it's a common ancestry tree with Debbie Reynolds. If you remember Singing in the Rain, and her daughter became Princess Leia. So I told my kids when they were in school, just tell them you're Princess Leia's cousin. Star Wars. But anyway, they also have the Dietrichs or the Dieters in their family line. And what I'm here today is talk about the militia. So Gary had the Connecticut Continental uniform, and I'm representing just what my ancestor was and several of my other ancestors. It's just a militia person, the National Guard. And they basically showed up in just what they had. Their hunting frocks, and I brought an example today. This would have been a cloth belt they would have worn. This is a hunting frock. The hunting frock is fringed for scent, and it would shed this. The collar is like this. I'm not wearing it because I'm extremely hot right now, and so I'm sweating like crazy. But it's fringed like that to shed the water off. And so this was Gore-Tex of the day, okay? And so they would just wear a hunting frock like this. Another thing they would wear, also the tricorn hat, as Gary is wearing. My friend said this is my circuit riding preacher hat, but This also can be pinned up to become a cocked hat. The reason they would do that is because they're carrying their muskets on their left shoulder, and you don't need the brim to get in the way of the musket, as I'll show you in just a second, going up and down, okay? And so they had their hat. This is a waistcoat. These were just regular work pants that they would have worn in those days, and a work shirt which doubles, and I can't imagine sleeping like this, as your nightgown or your sleeping attire. As much as I'm sweating right now, I can't imagine wanting to sleep in this thing, but anyway, that's what they did back in those days, okay? I'm going to go through real quick the musket. So this is a working musket. It's a reproduction. It's actually a kit that I put together myself. I bought from a guy in Ohio named Kibler. And this represents a Fowler, which is a 20 gauge shotgun, or an Indian trade gun. So these were made in England, and they were the cheaper end muskets. They're smooth bore, and they would trade with the Indians, these muskets. And this is how the Indians became armed. And in those days, a lot of people don't realize it, but it was kind of a two-fronted war because the French and Indian War had been just a couple decades earlier. And when gentlemen in the militia or in the military would go fight the British, they also were leaving their family fitted for themselves with the Indians on the western front, which was just the mountains, or western Pennsylvania or North Carolina. So it was really two kind of battles going on at the same time. So this being a flintlock musket, that's called half-cock, which is like a safety, okay? And there's a pan right here. And they would prime that pan. I have a powder horn on my back. I'll show you in just a second. They would prime that pan, and primarily they made cartridges. So they would have cartridges that were made from paper and had black powder in them, and then had a musket ball in them. This shoots a 62 caliber musket ball or shot. You can make a shotgun cartridge in this as well. And then after they would prime that pan, they would close the frizzen like that, which would keep it closed, and then they would cast it about like this. And then you've all seen them where they would dump the black powder and then a patch ball, and they'd pull the ramrod out and ram the patch ball down the musket barrel. And then they would go through the orders of make ready, aim, and fire. And they would do that about 3 times a minute. Okay, so you can imagine when they're firing and you could hear lead whizzing by you or see your partner there go down, lose a leg or lose an arm, because these are quite large pieces of lead. The fortitude it took just to stand there and load your weapon and fight like that. And then it would become hand-to-hand combat. Okay, and these type of muskets typically were not used in hand-to-hand combat because it's more of a thin, that would break. But the Charlevilles, the Brown Besses, they would have I'm drawing a blank, but the bayonet on the end, thank you. And the British were quite skilled in using the bayonet. Okay, whereas the Americans were not as skilled, but they learned the hard way how to fight with bayonets. So it was intimidating at the time for a bayonet charge to be coming at you, and then you're looking your person in the eye. You're fighting people hand-to-hand combat is the way it was back in those days. Okay, so that's the musket. We use this to fire in our musket demonstrations. A couple of things that went with this is just a little patch knife that when you put the patch in, you would cut the patch around so it fit properly in the thing. So it's just a small knife. Be kept up here. So it's just a patch knife made with a little bone handle. They had shot pouches, which is just a leather pouch. It has musket balls in there. They had extra flints. The flint, of course, just a rock. They would hit against the hardened steel of the frizzen and make a spark. When we do it with the kids, I'll pull out a fire starter kit, the old, and I would actually strike the iron against the flint rock and make the sparks and show them that that's how they made fire, and that's also how the musket fired back in those days. This is a shot pouch, and this actually has shot in it, which this is number 6 shot right here. So if you're a turkey hunter or something, this is the shot that you might use for that kind of thing. So that is the weapon. This also can prime the pan, your powder. This is somebody asked me if I blew this and I made that noise, but no. This is you would use this to prime your barrel with when you didn't have your cartridges made. Okay.
You didn't keep the powder in there?
Sorry.
You didn't keep the powder in
I don't, they did, but we don't, and typically when they were military fighting, they had pre-made cartridges. But if you were hunting, and a lot of militia people were hunters, they would keep powder in those horns. And so, yes, they did. We don't do that, and we typically, when we're firing, we use paper cartridges, which are pre-made, they're pre-measured. When you're going through, if you're going to try in palace and you see them demonstrating musket demonstration, you'll see they don't actually prime they don't use the powder horn. They'll pull it out. There's an order that tear the cartridge. They'll prime the pan with the cartridge, shut the fission, cast about. They'll take the rest of the black powder and then they'll use that as patching, ram the ball down and shoot like that. So they would have pouches that had 10 cartridges each pre-made up. Like this is a cartridge pouch right here. And inside this cartridge pouch is a place that you could put up to 20 cartridges. So you're pulling a cartridge out because in the war, speed was of the essence. This was a lot quicker just to pull out a pre-made cartridge, tear it, and make your that way. So yes, they did use powder horns, but typically in the military they use pre-made cartridges. Okay, so it's a good question. I'll go to this. This is a cartridge pouch. Okay, where you would keep your cartridges. This is my hunting pouch right here, and they would keep a lot of extras on that. This is because you're traveling on foot or with horses, no cars, so your powder sack is full of a lot of supplies, and for time I won't pull this stuff out. And then I have a canteen in the back here as well. Okay, so this is the water that I'm carrying about. And they use gourds, sometimes tin, and wooden canteens to carry water around with them. I drink a lot of water in my life, and I wondered, back then, finding fresh water had to be kind of a trick. And how did they drink as much water as I know I'm drinking? Because I'm trying not to drink sodas, so I'm drinking a lot of water. So you wonder about that. How many creeks and wells were they getting water out of to carry around and drink their 8 glasses a day? It probably wasn't as easy back in those days to doing that kind of thing. So, any other questions? Because I know I'm going to get the hook too. For anybody?
You showed us about your hat.
Okay, so all they would do is if I pin this up like this, it's a cocked hat. And let me show you how I mean. I apologize, I keep walking over here. So if I went through the pattern of, you just have to imagine this is pinned up. Tear the cartridge, prime the pan, close the frisbee, cast about, prime my barrel, pull the ramrod out, put the patch ball, ram the patch ball down, return the rammer, then I would end up in this sort of position. So when I'm in this position, I don't want the barrel to be hitting my hat. And so they would be cocked on this side, or wearing a tricorn hat. And the proper way to wear a tricorn hat is actually the point is over your left eye. So they really didn't wear them in the middle. They wore them like this, so that was a smooth and flat surface. So when they put their musket up like this, that it wasn't hitting their hat. And then they would say, make ready. They'd go to full cock. Then they would aim and fire, is what they would do. This is not letting go. So that's how they would fire. And then they would go back to their prime and load position. And when the call came out, they would prime and load again, and you'd shoot like that. And a lot of times the militia, you've heard Daniel Boone and the Kentucky rifle and that kind of thing, which is not what this is. Those were actually rifled. They actually had rifled muskets or rifles. The Kentucky rifle, the Pennsylvania rifle were rifled. They were not used on the battlefield as far as you see the guys that line up. They used smoothbore muskets because they fouled less. Black powder is very dirty, and the more you shoot it, all that fouling is building up inside. It becomes where you almost can't ram the ball down. Well, these rifled ones, these guys who made a living hunting, they learned from the Indians a smarter way to fight, really. Hide behind a
Use
tree.
the microphone for the TV people.
Yeah,
Ma'am?
need to use the microphone.
Sorry, thank you. So the people that were like Daniel Boone, if you watch the old show Daniel Boone, he had a Kentucky rifle. They might hide behind a tree and shoot, and they would actually aim for the epaulets, or aim for the, what's it called?
I don't know.
I can't think. But you've seen the gold or silver that they would wear. They'd aim for that, taking out the people who were the head folks for the other side. And they would fight that way with those rifles. So they really became the first sharpshooters, that kind of thing. So those kind of guys would use rifled, whereas this is a smooth bore. So, if you get outside of 50 yards, you're not exactly sure where it's going to land. But the rifles, they could shoot a couple hundred yards. You can go on YouTube and see guys today that go out there with remakes of these rifles, and they can shoot a couple hundred yards and hit a target. So they actually were quite accurate.
How long would you estimate that it took to get the bullet for me, because I can't think, out of the barrel?
The bullet out of the barrel.
Everything you were describing, what would you estimate?
Yeah, so it would be 3 a minute is what you would do. So 20 seconds for somebody who was really accurate with it. When we do our firings, it normally takes us about 1 minute and 45 seconds, because we'll have a whole line of guys that aren't making a profession of this to get it out. But if you 3 a minute is what they considered very proficient at doing that. So
Scott?
And you would always shoot them together?
So the guys in the line, you've seen these in the movies, they'll line up and they basically, those guys are just shooting at a line of other guys. Okay, they're not really shooting specific. Now, like I said, the guys that had the Kentucky rifles or the Pennsylvania rifles, they were aiming and firing at specific people. Okay, but the guys on the front line were just shooting in the general direction of the mass of other people, and just hoping it's going to hit. Sometimes they would shoot buck and ball, so it would be a ball mixed with a couple of buckshot, and that gives a higher chance of hitting somebody. Okay? Thank you very much.
Yeah, he does.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michelle Rose, and I am the chair of this company that goes and brings these types of programs to people. So, and I'm part of the DAR from Richard Dodd Spades in Newburgh. So Crystal contacted me so we could come. Just give you that little introduction. I am going to talk to you a little bit of some people who were not really paid attention about during the war. And those are, and yes, some people, when you say camp followers, they're thinking of one thing, but there were many other people that were there following the camps, in the camps following the soldiers. And General Washington wanted that to stop. However, he realized if he sent the woman who was the wife of a particular gentleman, most likely the gentleman would leave also. So it would reduce the number of men that he would have. He also realized, and many of the commanders realized, that men don't know how to wash their clothes, mend their clothes, and nurse, and all that, because it was the wife that did that at home. So I wanted you all to know that we women were pretty important to help the war to continue during that period of time. And it wasn't just women, it was also men, it was also slaves, and there were even some vendors that would come along and keep food coming and things of that sort. Now, the women went with the husbands because they were extremely fearful of staying home, because a lot of times when a lot of the other foes would come along, they would come to take all your animals, take whatever they needed, and God forbid, take you also, which is nothing a woman would want to deal with and stuff. So it was something that I wanted to bring up. And there is some really great books out there if you ever wanted to read up and find out how they became part of it. One of the ones that I loved the most was Belonging to the Army. And it actually gives you a lot of information from the women, the men, and how they served. And it was written by Holly Mayer, who went off to Afghanistan and came back and decided she would write the book about this. And it was really an interesting story. And it gives you a lot of information and the importance, because the men, when women were there, used also the women for spies and espionage and all that stuff, because women were not looked upon. We were not part of anything important, so we would be able to walk along and listen. And there's a story about a young girl who was walking, and she heard, it was, I believe, a North Carolinian, she was about 14, 16, and she overheard a little discussion between the British and realized they were going to go and do harm to her father, who had the company a few miles away. So she got on the horse and rode and saved that whole unit from doing that. So there's a lot of wonderful stories in there. And also, I just wanted to put a little plug in. If you have time and want to check it out, I went and created 5 binders that tell you from plant to cloth how long it took to create all these products. And in 1770, during that period of time, there were 5 different cloths. There was the wool, the cotton, the linen, which was flax, hemp, and also silk. We actually grew silkworms here and had some silk. So it will show you from the beginning to end, just that ugly cocoon to the cloth. And I actually wove some pieces in the back so that you could see. And it's really interesting. I learned a lot. I learned that the very first flag that Betsy Ross created was actually a hemp flag made with hemp. And there were a lot of other things I learned. I also learned it took 7 hours of spinning to create 1 hour of weaving. So just imagine how long, and that was just part of their whole things that they had to do, the women. It took basically a year to get your next dress. So, nowadays you can call Amazon and a t-shirt shows up. So it's all very interesting. Thank you so much, folks. Take care.
Thank you, Michelle. So she talked a little bit about textiles, which brings us to the clothing. And we do look a little different from you guys, don't we? So we thought we would tell you a little bit about clothing from the 18th century. We're going to focus on about 1770 to 1790, which is what we have on. So I'll talk first about the ladies' clothing. To get dressed in the morning, you would wake up and your nightgown would also be your shift or your chemise, and it would be what you wore underneath all of these articles of clothing. Hopefully you would have another one that's clean, but not everyone did. On the average, a woman would have 4 to 5 shifts of her own. They mainly were made out of cotton or, at earlier 1770s, normally linen. Cotton was not king yet. They had it, but it was extremely expensive. So most women's shifts would be made out of linen. And then if she was extremely wealthy, she might have a very formal one that's silk. The reason she would wear that is because it is a barrier between her skin and her stays, which is what is your underpinnings. And they then turned into what we called corsets. So she would have her shift. Then she would put on her stockings. Stockings, as Gary mentioned before, did not have elastic. They come up very high onto the thigh. So she also would wear a garter. And normally the garter would be a ribbon. Sometimes it would be something thick, almost like cardstock is what it would feel like. And she could embroider that. And then, of course, if she was working, her garter could be leather and buckle. But she would have to have something to keep those stockings up. And then after her shift, then she would put on her stays, and that is typically made out of cotton or linen and whalebone. And yes, it was whalebone. They don't make whalebone anymore because it's illegal, but they do have a simulated whalebone. Mine is the same way. The 18th century the stays are longer. They could tie in the front, they could tie in the back, or they could tie in the front and the back, which made no sense to me. But anyway, you could always tell the status of a woman by if her stays tied in the back. What does that tell you? She had a servant, exactly. She had someone to dress her. If she was a worker, she would have her stays tied in the front because she would not have someone to dress her. Now, if she was also a worker, she probably wouldn't have the whalebone, which the whalebone was coming from the baleen, the jaw of the whale, because that was a little bit more flexible. So she did have a little bit of flexibility in there, but that's where it normally came from. But if she was a worker, then the material would be normally reed, and that reed would allow her to bend with her movements that she needed to perform during the day to be able to bend. So that was what her stays would be made out of. Then she would have over her stays, mostly she would have her under petticoat if it was in the winter, if she was in the northern colonies, or if she was looking for fullness, she would have an under petticoat. She also would have an underpinning. Your underpinning would give you the support and the silhouette. So she might have a half moon, what they called a bum roll. The fashion of the time was not to have a tiny waist, but to have a little more junk in the trunk. Yeah, so you've seen that oftentimes, and I apologize, I'm not wearing mine today. It was middle of the day on Monday. But you would have seen, it did make the waist look smaller, but it would accentuate the hips, or she could have a bum pad, and the bum pad was literally layers of padding that would push that petticoat out. And so then she would wear her pocket, because they did not have pockets sewn into your clothing. For women, they would carry everything in their pockets, and everything was tied on or pinned on or hook and eyes. There was no zippers. There were no Velcro, obviously, but no zippers. And also for women, buttons were only used for decoration. So you'll see I have, sorry for turning my back, but you'll see I have buttons here. Well, these were only used because this will be able to pollinate if I wanted to for a different look. Or if I was wearing what's called a redingote, and a redingote is a riding habit. And that would be made to look just like the men's military uniform, so it would be styled in that way, and it would have buttons as well. But normally no buttons, and so everything would be pinned. So she would wear her pocket tied on, and the way that she would get to that is the way she would put her petticoat on is you would tie your petticoat from the back to the front, and then you would tie from the front to the back, and that would make a slit right in the side where you can reach your pocket inside. And you could carry your keys, you could carry whatever you needed to take. You could carry your 18th century cell phone, whatever you needed to take at the time. So that's how a woman was able to carry things. She also would wear either during the day a bedrobe, which we would always think of nighttime, but it was called a bedrobe, which you'll see some of the other ladies wearing. What I'm wearing was very common. You would think that this would be a more formal gown, but it was not. This is an English gown, popular again from the 1770s to 1790, and this was very common. It was not exceptionally formal. This was common for a lady, not a worker, but a lady. And then there was also what we call a sack dress or a French gown, and that was formal. And there were certain things that she could do to make that even more formal, and that's, if you're really into fashion, I advise you to look into it. There's all kinds of blogs and things like that. She would have worn a fichu. A fichu is what we call, it sometimes is for modesty. It could also be to whisk away glistening. That's another word for sweat. But you could also Her materials that she wore depended on her status. If she was wealthy, she might wear cotton. She might wear printed cotton. If she wore printed cotton, you knew she was very wealthy. If she had silk, there were different types of silk depending on how much you wanted to spend on it. Some were expensive, some not. Linen was the fabric of the day. Linen was what you would see on every woman, pretty much, of all levels of society, economic-wise. You also would see flax, especially if you were a worker bee. So there were all kinds of things. There were very few fashion styles. So the way that you saw the difference was the fabric, because there were only so many ways you could wear a fashion. Of course, you always wanted to cover your hair. If you were inside, didn't matter who you were, your hair would be covered, not for religious reasons, but remember, they didn't wash their hair very often. And also, we didn't have the hardscapes, we didn't have concrete, we didn't have asphalt, and we didn't have as much brick on the floor, on the ground. So we would always make sure our hair was covered because it would keep it cleaner for longer. And so a woman inside the home would always wear a mop cap. Then she would also, when outside, because even though it was back in the 1700s, they were very well aware of keeping their skin safe, and she would always make sure that she was protected. So she would wear a hat when she was outside. She might choose to wear it over her mop cap, but she definitely would make sure she was covered. Her shoes would either be buckled or tied. She did wear at times mules, the slip-ons, which I think is interesting. They did not wear the ballet slippers until more of the Regency era, so you wouldn't have seen that as much. They were narrow-toed, and they also, did we have a left and right shoe? No, they were all the same. You could wear one on one foot and then switch it and wear it on the other. So you can imagine how uncomfortable that was, especially for our soldiers. If they had shoes, and that was lucky, they would have the same soled shoes as well. So you can only imagine how uncomfortable that would be, walking on uneven surface for miles and miles and miles in shoes, one of them being the wrong foot. I mean, that's difficult to think about. So the men, kind of the same thing. They would wear their breeches. They could be long. They did wear long pants or the short breeches. They were gusseted, so they would tie in the back, and they had the flat front. Again, no zippers back then. And they were always baggy in the bottom. And the reason they were baggy in the bottom is because they had to be able to get up and down from a horse. They had to be getting up and down from the ground because they had to get into that stance of being able to shoot and then be able to get up quickly. They also wore their nightshirt was also their day shirt. Again, as Scott Brake had mentioned, you can only imagine the smell. They might have turned in originally to be white, but then they would have eventually turned into what we call a neutral or a wheat color. They would have worn their waistcoat, and then they would have also worn their jackets, whatever they were, and something on their head. Again, they would have been covering their head. So I'm also getting the hook. I'm not the only one that gives the hook. So I'm going to have Sims come up.
Hi, I'm Sims Wade. I'm with the Richard Dobbs State Chapter with DAR. I'm going to wrap it up by talking for 2 seconds about My Patriot while I pass out these stickers. The gentleman talked about their patriots. I have 6 from North Carolina. Oh, you'll do this for me? Thank you. I have 6 from North Carolina. 5 of them were men who fought at Kings Mountain. I'm a McDowell from McDowell County. And the 6th one was a woman. And she is recognized as a patriot because she rolled the bullets for the Army. What I wanted to talk about today was America 250. How many of y'all remember the bicentennial? I was hoping everybody here, right? I want you tonight to go home and call your children and your grandchildren if they're under the age of 45. They do not remember the bicentennial at all. And when we talk about America 250, we get a lot of strange looks. They don't realize that 2026 is a big year. It's not necessarily on their algorithms for their social media. And that's all I can say. We go out and talk to the kids and try to explain what the bicentennial was like. We go and talk to elementary school kids and say, what do you want to do to celebrate America 250? And luckily they do know about the 4th of July parade, so most of them go to that. But what we're trying to tell the message is that America 250 is the entire year of 2026. And it's about not just the Revolutionary War, not just about 1776, which is what we concentrate on, but about all of the events, the people, the policies, the laws, the amendments, everything that has changed over the 250 years with this great melting pot of a country and how we got here. So we reach out to communities, groups that you wouldn't necessarily think. We talk to the Civil War people. We talk to people that are in the arts, like the quilting groups. We want everybody to realize that you are part of this great festival, America 250. So at the national level, the kickoff for America 250 was at the fair and this past year on July 4th in 2025. And then not many people knew about that, but it was the kickoff for the state fairs, so that the state fairs this year are following and doing more America 250 focuses. The 4th of July parade in DC is obviously a big one. They're going to be doing a lot of stuff in Philadelphia, and they have a Libertyville event there. They're reaching out across all the states. The State Assembly in North Carolina gave out $1.9 million to the counties and community groups, so that almost not 100 of them, all 100% of them got money, but most of them did, so that they can do something special. Some are doing events where they're bringing in special displays from the museums like Philadelphia or the American Battlefield Trust group. Some are doing markers. Jones County is doing markers for all of their buildings from the 18th century that are still standing. And if the buildings are not there, they're at least marking where the location was. So each county is trying to do something different. For the symphony is doing Patriot Pops. It's coming in June to New Bern, but they're doing it all the way across the summer, across the state. So be on the lookout for that. Are there any questions? Because I know y'all want to take a look at the stuff that's on the table.
What is the 250th anniversary called?
They always do this to me. Semi-sequencentennial.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, yay! I usually go say America 250 because I can never get it right in front of the kids.
You had a question here, Sims.
Yes, I was wondering, how many perished in the Revolutionary War?
How many died in the war?
Perished in the Revolutionary War.
How many died in the Revolutionary War?
It was somewhere around between killed and wounded, somewhere around 500,000.
500,000?
Yeah. I do.
Did that include the slaves?
Yes.
And I should also mention that we have Harlem Patriots that are out in Craven County. We'll talk about that in a minute.
I do every Memorial Day. I'm fortunate to be a Vietnam veteran, and every Memorial Day in New Bern we have a ceremony at the New Bern National Cemetery, and I do the opening speech about the history of Memorial Day. And since the American Revolution, including the American Revolution, all of the battles, skirmishes that we have fought, American Revolution, World War I, World War II, etc., we have had 1.2 million people die protecting our country. 1.2 million. As I said, freedom is not free.
I mentioned really briefly about the Harlow Patriots. It's a small little settlement near Havelock, and 14 freedmen of color went and volunteered to fight on the Patriot side. And they fought at many of the battles that you would recognize, like Saratoga. I think they fought at Camden. And then they all came home and told their kids about it. And what's really neat is that Harlow has a marker for these patriots because about 6 years ago, the Sons of American Revolution recognized them, and they have a chapter called Isaac Carter Chapter, which is named after one of the Harlow Patriots. And they, descendants, are in the process of writing a kids book to tell the stories that they brought down through the 250 years.
You have a
We
question?
have two members that are descendants of Absalom Martin, who was one of those men
Yes.
in our DAR chapter in Freeman.
Yes, they're kind of spread out a little bit. So, anything else?
You want to talk about that, Tom?
Actually, it brings us to another interesting topic because we now in the DAR have a new committee, E Pluribus Unum. And the E Pluribus Unum committee is looking to find more patriots that we used to call forgotten, but now we are rediscovering, so they're calling them rediscovered patriots. And their focus on the E Pluribus Unum committee is finding patriots of color, women, and Native American. And they're finding one of the things that's very interesting, especially in the state of North Carolina, if you were a person of color and you took an oath to support the patriotic cause, if you find that you are related to that person, you have a patriot. And so that is becoming something that we are focusing on to try to recognize these unsung heroes that haven't necessarily gotten the attention in the past because we just didn't know about them. But because of technology, with DNA and AI, we are able to find out more and more now about these patriots that were not recognized in the past. So this is exciting news for everyone.
Thank you.
Any questions? Any questions for anyone?
Why don't you come up?
Yeah, you guys are welcome to come up. You're welcome to look at the things on the table. You're welcome to ask us about our clothing. You are just open, we're open. If we don't know, we'll ask each other, and if we don't know that, then we'll find out for you. Because the 18th century cell phones had Google. So